Hi everyone, recently I uploaded a video comparing 3 Canon RF lenses for you. And today I'm going to do the same in English. Today we're going to have a look at 3 lenses by Canon. That's the RF 35mm 1.L VCM. Then I got the RF 35mm and last but not least their latest version, the Canon RF 50mm. We will have a look at what all of them have in common, what are the specs, handling, price, and for what I'm using them. I took so many examples and I'm pretty sure at the end of this video you have made your decision which lens suits you the best. So first of all, we're gonna speak about the body. All of them are fixed focal lenses. You cannot zoom with these lenses because I see people all around and they do this and they said, okay, it's not gonna zoom. And I said, that's the focus ring. So you have to make your decision before getting this lens. They have other strengths and one of their strengths is not zooming. So they all look the same, they all have the same size, they almost have the same weight, and from the side you cannot really tell which lens I'm holding in which hand except for their lens hood because they look different. As you can see, that's the one from the 24mm, then I have the one from the 35mm, and the 50mm looks like this. But overall, if I compare two lenses with each other side by side, you cannot really tell, oh, that's the 50mm or that's the 35mm lens. None of them has an optical image stabilizer and they almost have the same weight. Inside their package was a little bag. They are all protected against dust and splash water. Their maximum aperture is 1.4, which is beautiful to separate the 4 from the background. And the minimum aperture is 16. All of them have 11 aperture blades for round bokeh balls. They all have the same filter diameter of 67mm. They have an RF ring here at the front, a focus ring, an RF button, an iris control ring to change the aperture, a programmable button here at the side, and a switch for the autofocus and the manual focus. The RF ring is super nice. You can go into your Canon's menu and select what you would like to change with that ring. For instance, the ISO, shutter speed, white balance, aperture, and so on. But you can also use it for something else. I changed the size and the shape of the focus field with that. On older RF lenses, you cannot find this button here at the side, but I find it quite handy because with a single tap, I can change of what's gonna happen next in front of the camera. So if I'm in video mode, I can use that button to track something. So anytime I push this button, my camera starts tracking something which is in front of the camera. If I push this here in photo mode, I can jump between different modes like vehicles, animals, people, or nothing. So let's start with the Canon RF 35mm 1.L VCM. Why the 35mm and not the 24mm? Because I got my 35mm last year, 2024, in August, which was the first lens that came out in that size and shape by Canon. And I'm pretty sure if the 24mm 1.4 would have come out before the 35mm, I would have probably saved about 1,800 euros here in Germany. Of course, I saw that lens and I said, wow, in the past I had the Sigma was it 1.4 or 1.8? I guess it was 1.4 art lens for my EF mount. This lens had also done a pretty good job for me and my work, and I earned a lot of money with that, using it for events and for videos here on my YouTube channel. Years later, new camera and a new lens. So I said to myself, 35mm, that's a pretty good focal length. I'm not too narrow, I'm not too far away. That's something really good between a 24mm and a 50mm. In the past, I had a 50mm 1.2, which I sold because I saw, wow, there was the 50mm 1.4 coming out. And I'll tell you the reason why I sold the 1.2 version in a bit. And I'm using pretty much this lens if I would like to get the focus on something specific. That means for taking portraits, for instance, to capture some details. A lot for my YouTube videos. So anytime here in my YouTube videos, if you see some sort of details, it's mostly done with this lens here. It's a fixed focal length, 1.4 aperture, super nice for bokeh shots. You don't have too much background on it and you're not too close either, which makes it like two perfect lenses between those other two fixed focal lengths. It weighs 555 grams. Their closest focusing distance is only at 28 centimeters, which is close enough to go with your camera somewhere and capture some nice flowers, for instance, or details. For me, it's an absolutely brilliant lens for event photography, for video, for portraits, food, and as an always-on lens for my camera. Then just a few months later, Canon has announced their 24mm 1.4L VCM, which I was waiting for probably day one when I got my Canon EOS R back in the days. And now about 6 years later, I finally hold it in my hands because I was using their previous version, which was the Canon EF 24 1.4 Mark II version. It's the same price of 1749 euros here in Germany, but it's the lightest version with 515 grams. In the past, the EF version helped me a lot to make my money when it comes to event photography, because that is mainly the thing where I make my money with event photography. Let's say capturing photos in bars, clubs, and weddings. At the moment, I'm filming myself on this Sony a7C Mark II using a 24mm 1.4 G Master lens. It's a great lens for interior events. Its closest focusing distance is only at 24 centimeters, so you can easily remember 24mm, 24 centimeters. And it's one of the lenses that I got for the combination Canon EOS R5 Mark II, using this lens on my DJI Ronin RS4, which is super nice for all the YouTube works I do, because it's a super lightweight combination of a wide angle lens. You have a 1.4 aperture, you can blur out the foreground or the background. I can film some details around some certain things. And if it's dark outside, I don't need to push the ISO too far because it has a 1.4 aperture. And the combination using a Canon EOS R5 Mark II with this lens, the autofocus is just brilliant, even for moving subjects. So then was New Year's Eve 2024, and I was at my favorite photo store in Frankfurt, and they had the 50mm 1.4L in stock. So I tested it, I came back, I tested it again. 2 hours later, I said to myself, you know what, Daniel, I'm gonna buy this lens anyways, and why not today? On this day, I had an event that I was taking photos of. I said, if there's a day and a good chance to get a good price, and one day that I need it, it's gonna be today. And this night, I took some really nice photos of an event, lots of portraits, detail shots, and 2 months later, I love this lens. So sometimes I go out having this lens attached to my Canon EOS R5 Mark II. You're not too close like with a 24 or 35mm lens. So in the past I had the 50mm 1.2 version, and I never went out with this lens because it was so big and heavy. It was like almost twice the size compared to the old EF version. It had a 77mm filter, and for me it wasn't the lens to just go out, take some nice pictures, like an always-on camera lens for portraits of something. So I'm pretty lucky that Canon actually introduced this RF 50mm 1.4 version. I do take a lot of street photos, portraits, video, and it's a super nice lens for events like weddings and parties, and also for details. The only downside is that they haven't reduced the minimum focusing distance compared to the 1.2 version. It's still set at 40 centimeters. But it's the cheapest version of all of them. At retails in Germany at 1600 euros, but it's also the heaviest version with 580 grams. So that's only a difference of 65 grams compared to the 24mm. So if I have my Canon EOS R5 Mark II on the DJI Ronin RS4, I can even change the lens without resetting or recalibrating my gimbal. Of course, the better it's calibrated, the better the result, but it's able to compensate that 65 grams difference without doing too many adjustments on that gimbal. Usually I use the 24mm in combination with my Canon EOS R5 Mark II on my RS4. This day I was using the 50mm and I was super impressed how it looks like. So the field of view, super nice. You can blur out the fall from the background completely and it looks so cinema-like that I decided, wow, next time I'm going to go out, film my reviews using the 50mm instead of the 24mm. The handling on these three lenses is pretty much the same. You cannot really tell which lens you're holding in your hands if you're just looking from the front or from the rear or from the side, except looking on their numbers. They're all super lightweight. They have a 1.4 aperture. You can put all three of them in your camera backpack because they don't take too much space right there. And most of the time I go out and take two of them with me for one job. So let's say I have a small camera bag, then I'm gonna take the Canon EOS R5 Mark II, I'm using the 24, and let's say a 50mm, sometimes I take the 35 and the 24mm, or the 35 and the 50mm, that's a rare combination, but sometimes I do this, and they all fit into my small camera bag. Let's speak about sharpness, and I have so many people complaining about sharpness. Most of the time it's not the lens that is producing unsharp photos, not even on the older EF versions. They had other issues, but sharpness wasn't really a problem. It's most of the time the wrong combination between the ISO, shutter speed, and the aperture. So if I would like to take a photo of someone playing soccer in front of me and I'm using a 1/10 of a second shutter speed, ISO 500 and an aperture of 16, I'm not gonna get sharp images. First of all, I'm thinking, will I take now a picture of something which is moving? Then the first thing that comes into my mind is the shutter speed. So I need to take a fast shutter speed. Is it bright enough or not? Then I'm thinking about the ISO. Or I'm thinking, do I want a sharp background or an unsharp background? So then I'm gonna think about the aperture. Let's say I'm gonna take a picture of a soccer player. He runs away, so I'm gonna use 1/1000 of a second. Then I'm gonna think, well, I would like to have a blur background, so I'm gonna use a faster aperture. Or I'm thinking, well, I want to get him with a 5.6 aperture. So the only thing I need to think of is the ISO. And if you choose the right combination between those three, you will get sharp images. And anywhere you set the focus point, you will produce sharp photos. The 24mm is a super nice lens if you film yourself at home. Like right now, I'm filming myself with a 24mm. If I wouldn't have that wall just behind me, I could blur out the background completely, also from a distance of only 60 centimeters away. I don't need a super bright video light in order to record myself, thanks to the 1.4 aperture. I have set this video light up here, which is only running at 7%, and it gives you a super nice look for events. If you have groups in front of you. Sometimes if you're in a nightclub, for instance, and you want to take some pictures, a 35mm is most of the time too close, a 50mm is way too close, but a 24mm is super nice for group shots, also for weddings. I use this lens for food, street, nature, and also when it comes to macro shots. However, it's not a macro lens, but 24 centimeters minimum focusing distance here on this lens is pretty good. And as I said, for video and for my gimbal shots. I want this 35mm lens on my Canon EOS R5 Mark II and my Canon EOS R3. When I don't want any lines falling into the background, I want this lens for group shots, which consists only for, let's say, 2 or 3 people. And I use this also for a lot of details. So here in my YouTube videos, if I will take some pictures of details, or if I film something like a microphone, or on my desk, if I go with that Zero-E HA77 arm on my desk, it's usually a 35mm that films from above because I don't have too much background on it. I can film in landscape mode, so as in portrait mode. It's super nice for street photography, for food, as I said, for details, for video, and also obviously for my gimbal. If I need pretty straight lines, I'm gonna use the 50mm. It's obviously a super nice lens when it comes to portrait photography, for details, also for video, as I figured out myself, and I use it a lot of times if I want to go out with one camera. I have attached this lens to it, and I use it many times if I just want to go out with one camera. It's a super nice sunny day. I will take this lens with me if I want to capture some cool portraits, street photography, and when I'm on events where I have more space. So by now, thank you very much for your attention. If you like this comparison so far, please make sure to subscribe. Give this video a thumbs up. Make sure to comment which lens you would like to get or which lens you're using already. And you can find all the accessories which I used to record this video listed in the video description below. So you will find the power bank, which I'm always using to charge my Canon EOS cameras because they require power delivery and I'm working outside quite a lot. So I need full power also for my MacBook Pro 16-inch. And this power bank here helps me to get it charged and to work at the same time using Photoshop, Adobe Lightroom and Final Cut 11. And if you live in Germany and you want to get one of these lenses, make sure to send me an email and I will connect you with my favorite photo dealer to get a discount. Now let's continue. So when it comes to flaring, I cannot tell you which lens has the most amount of lens flares. Sometimes I had the impression it was the 24mm. On the other day, I thought, wow, the 35mm, a lot of stray lights. And on the other day, I said, wow, the 50mm has no flaring at all. And then I placed it somewhere else and I'm like, wow, a lot of lens flares. So if you want to avoid stray lights, make sure to use the lens hood or point your camera in a different angle to the light. However, you can also make use of flaring when it comes to portrait or detail shots. Having the sun in the background is a super nice thing for a sunrise or a sunset. To get the lens flare in that picture, super nice. Also when it comes to details, if you want to take a picture of a flower, for instance, and the sun sets in the background, also really nice. Now let's speak about the autofocus and tracking capabilities of all these three lenses. Of course, I'm using here highly expensive cameras, and in combination with both cameras, and I would say also the same applies to the Canon EOS R1, you get ultra good autofocus capabilities. So neither of these lenses is slow in terms of autofocusing. I was quite impressed about the 50mm 1.4 because that seems to be much quicker compared to the 1.2 version, which was like super heavy, big, and it took some more time to focus on specific things using the 1.2 version. And now I have the 1.4 version and I kind of see the difference between those last 4 or 5 years when the 50mm 1.2 version came out, that this has improved also in terms of cameras, obviously. The RF ring helps me for my autofocus because anytime I turn that ring, as I said, I change the size and the shape of my focus field. And if I want to capture a detail of something, I use a small focus field. If I'm going for someone who's walking towards the camera, I'm using a bigger focus field. That's for video, but it's also super important to use this button here on the side when it comes to photos, because I can push this button and then I tell the camera instantly what I would like to track. Say people, vehicles, animals, or nothing. I would say in photo mode, it really doesn't matter which camera you have, if it's an old Canon EOS R or RP or R6 Mark II, for instance. But when it comes to moving subjects, of course, the more expensive the camera is, the newer the camera is, you will see a slightly improvement here, especially in video mode, because tracking wise, it works much better with the Canon EOS R5 Mark II instead of having an old Canon EOS R. It is important that you tell the camera what you would like to track. So if you have selected vehicle, but you want to track a person or an animal, that's not gonna work. So make sure to go in the AF menu, tell the camera what's now important, or use the button on the side, and then I'm pretty sure you will get super good results. Two more topics, video and bokeh. Let's speak about video first. So all three of them, as I said just a few minutes ago, they perform super nice when it comes to video. The autofocus is good. You can blur out the background completely. It's super nice for interviews. It's super nice for a camera setup like a rig or something, or if you put them on a gimbal, because they differ not much by their weight. And these 11 aperture blades, they create a super nice blur background. So the 24mm is usually good if I record myself at home. It's super nice if I run through the city, having it attached to my Canon EOS R5 Mark II and my gimbal, for interior and obviously for the night sky because of the 1.4 aperture. The 35mm mm in terms of video is super nice if you capture some details. If you sit at home and you have set up your camera on your desk and you want to film jewelries, for instance, or food, that is a lens to go with. And the 50mm is especially good for interview situations. If you have set up your camera and you want to film from the side or from a different angle, you don't have too much background on it, or you can blur it out if you want to. I wish they would have reduced their minimum focusing distance to, let's say, 30 centimeters instead of 40 centimeters in order to get closer to my subjects. But when it comes to video, they all perform really well. Last but not least, we're gonna speak about bokeh. All of them have 11 aperture blades. Super nice for the round shaped bokeh balls. They all have different closest focusing distances, but all of them blur out the background completely if you want to and if you pick the right setting. What I would use is an ND filter for daylight. In this case, I'm using the Nissi 1 to 5 stops. You can find it also as a link in the video description below. It's not the cheapest ND filter you can get out there, but it's super nice because you can keep your settings, you can use the same aperture, and the only thing you need to change is make a twist on the ND filter itself, and then you can jump between 1 and 5 stops. So last but not least, my summary. If I could decide which lens I could buy out of these three instantly, I would go for the 24mm. That's my personal opinion, by the way, because you might think I will never ever take wide angle shots. I wouldn't go for a 24mm because my primary photography or video, whatever you do, is like something with portraits. Then you would probably go with a 50mm. For me, 24mm is super nice because I can have a lot of background on it if I want to. I can blur out the background if I want to, due to its closest focusing distance of 24 centimeters. And this lens earns my money with event photography. So if I'm gonna take event shots on a wedding, in a nightclub or in a bar, I can get at least 3 people on it. So it makes a lot of sense for me to get a 24mm. If the 24mm would have came out before the 35mm and not vice versa, I probably would have saved 1700 bucks on the 35mm, because a 35mm is something in between. If you cannot decide, should I go for a 50mm or a 24mm, and then I'm using it most of the time specifically for something, so recording detail shots, food, or on events. But 24mm, I can have it all day long on my camera, and I'm not thinking, oh, do I need now a 35mm? So, but that's kind of personal. If I had to decide between 2 of these 3 lenses, my answer is quite simple. I would go for a 50mm and the 24mm. 24mm, super nice because 1.4 aperture, a lot of background. 50mm, obviously also 1.4 aperture, blur background, but nice for portraits, so I have a contrast. 24mm if I want to take some group shots, 50mm if I just want to take a portrait shot of someone. Not too much background, a bit closer, and it gives me more kind of a natural look instead of having a 24mm with me. And now I'm pretty happy to hear your opinion about these 3 lenses. Do you have 1, 2, or even 3? Do you want to get one of these lenses? Then make sure to leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up if you'd like these examples. And if you have any further questions, please make also sure to leave a comment below. All the best here from Cologne. See you next time und tschüss.